Let's go ahead and get started. I'm Dana Connell. I'm one of the co-chairs, along with Laura Connell, of the Racial Justice Committee at Kenilworth Union Church. And this is the third in a series of 3 speakers that we've had over the last 3 Monday nights. Welcome. We are delighted that all of you are here. And if you missed any of the 2 prior sessions, we were talking about those a minute ago, and really encourage you to follow the same link that brought you here to the Zoom call, or I'm sorry, the same email that provided the link will also provide you with a link to those 2 presentations if you missed them. As for tonight, we are delighted to have Rabbi Sam Gordon with us to discuss Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. She, of course, wrote the book, The Warmth of Other Suns, back in 2010. And her latest book is on many, if not all, of the bestseller or the best books of 2020. So before Rabbi Gordon leads us in a presentation and then a discussion, let me just lay out a little bit of process. Bill will introduce his friend, Rabbi Gordon. We then will have the presentation, and then we'll have a period of time for questions and discussion. I will assist Rabbi Gordon in those questions, either by looking for hands or by watching the chat feature. So I'm sure that's plenty of process for everybody. And let's move on with Bill's introduction of Sam.
Thank you, Dana. So I'm very pleased to introduce my good friend, Sam Gordon. Sam is the senior rabbi and the founding rabbi at Sukkat Shalom, Congregation Sukkat Shalom on Central Avenue in Wilmette. And Sam, I learned a lot about the congregation from Sam when I interviewed him at his place a couple of weeks ago, and found out that Sam established this congregation primarily for interfaith families, for Christians married to Jews. And it started with his children's friends, parents of his children's friends and his wife's friends. And it's this grown to be this wonderful, one of the great congregations on the North Shore. And that's exactly how I came to meet Sam for the first time. One of my members was married to one of his members. Sam's member died, so we did the memorial service at Sukkat Shalom. And I'll let him talk more about this if he wants to. But what's so poetic about this and what's so shapely about this relationship, let me start back a minute. In my last congregation in Connecticut, we tore down our whole building and built a new one. So we were homeless for about 18 months. And so I really came to value my professional and clerical relationships with my clergy colleagues. I just really leaned on them a lot. And when we moved into our new facility, First Presbyterian Church in Greenwich became a hospitable benefactor to anybody else who needed a home. So we had a kind of a small baby congregation, Jewish congregation, a synagogue that met with us every Shabbat. And that is Sam's experience too. Congregation Sukkat Shalom was homeless for many, many years. And now they have this beautiful home, but that experience of homelessness made them open to other congregations who were homeless, including Kenilworth Union Church. We were so warmly welcomed. In 2017, was it, Sam, I think? Summer of 2017?
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
And it was so wonderful. He's my dear, dear friend. And we've had 2 great speakers these last 2 Monday nights. And Sam is a great teacher and great preacher. So I'm so happy to have you, Sam.
Well, thank you. You know, it is, many of us are complaining about the fact that we have to do all this by Zoom. And there's no question that I would much prefer to be with all of you in person. But then on a night like tonight, I imagine you would found any excuse to not come out in the snow and the ice to be in person. So there are actually some advantages to being able to do Zoom. And I also want to say that I don't want this to be a partisan conversation. I know that Kenilworth Union, just like Sukkat Shalom, is a congregation, a community of diverse political opinion. And so I don't want it to be focused on those partisan divisions politically that divide us. But I think one of the great things about Isabel Wilkerson's book is it gives us an opportunity to reframe an issue that is of great concern to all of us in our country. I think Dana mentioned the subtitle of the book, and I think the subtitle is really important. The origins of our discontents, that looking at caste as an issue that really defines many of the divisions that we see in America today. She starts, I think, and throughout the book, she uses a number of metaphors that I think are very helpful. The imagery really spoke to me. First, she talked about anthrax being released from the permafrost in global warming in Russia, and a disease that is hidden underneath, covered over by the permafrost of the tundra, and yet suddenly it's there underneath, and when released becomes so dangerous. She also talks about being an old house that we may love living in, but realizing that it is filled with flaws. She also uses the metaphor of a family that has a history of alcoholism, and that they have in many ways been in denial, but there's going to come a time when that history is going to be churned up. Bill, I don't know if you've done a lot of family systems therapy, but she talks about a long-running plague. When we talk about families, we often say, or if I'm counseling a young couple getting married, I use the metaphor of being born into a play. And that when we're born into a play, we're given a role in that play. We're thrown lines. We may be the youngest child or the oldest. We may be the star or the troubled one. And that's who we are. And the play changes because we're in it, but the play's been going on for generations and generations. And when, this is back to the premarital counseling, I say to a couple, they're going to be starting their own play now, and their wedding is Act 1, Scene 2, but their wedding for their family is Act 3, Scene 4. We live in plays, and the play in America is this caste system, often she says caste is the bones, race is the skin. So race is a way we understand caste, but caste is a deeper issue. And without understanding the depth of what the caste definition is, we really aren't going to be able to deal with the challenge that we have of race. She explained that caste is a ranking of groups, distinct from each other, each of them assigned a place. I remember a long time ago, and I'm going to refer to different movies, I think, for whatever reason, or plays. But I remember in a movie, probably in the mid 60s, hearing it said that in the South, African Americans can be close, but not too big. But in the North, you can be big as long as you're not too close. Again, I don't know how many of you recently saw the movie One Night in Miami, but there's an incredible scene in One Night in Miami. It takes place in the South, in Florida, but I think this one scene is either in Alabama or in Georgia, where where the great football player, Jim Brown, is visiting a white kind of plantation owner who really admires him and thinks the world of him. And they're sitting on the porch and they're having some lemonade, and this this plantation home owner could not be nicer to Jim Brown. But then he has to go inside the house, and Jim starts going in the house, and he says, and I'm not going to use the N word, he says, "Oh, Jim, you know that people like you aren't allowed in the house, in the main house." And it defined for Jim Brown, who was the greatest football star of the time, that he still was seen in this caste system. Isabel Wilkerson talks about the caste system of India, and she also talks about Nazi Germany, as well as America. She says it's about power, who has it and who doesn't. But that in America, and this is what I think is surprising, is that America is unique in using race as the signal of rank. Forgive me again for plays and movies, but I'm thinking of England. And in England, in Britain, you know one's caste, one's rank because of their accent, of the way they speak. And so you have Eliza Doolittle, or later on, Margaret Thatcher, learning how to speak Etonian, Oxfordian, upper class, with an upper class accent, and that people are ranked according to that, and you know your place in Britain. And the privileges that accrue to somebody who is in an upper level of caste is really significant. But it also is very important to see how caste allows people to look down on those of a lower class. And of course, in America, that is a racial distinction. Let's be honest, I've been in Wilmette for 40 years. I've been in the same home, in East Wilmette, of course. And I speak to you as a rabbi, therefore I'm Jewish. And there is, without question, a caste system on the North Shore. Paul Cowan wrote a book probably, again, 40 years ago, or maybe 45 years ago, called Orphan in History. It was about being an assimilated Jew and growing up with his grandfather, Modi Spiegel of Spiegel Catalog. And Modi Spiegel lived in Kenilworth and was the only Jew who lived in Kenilworth. And Modi Spiegel became Christian Scientist and was a member of the Christian Science Church, maybe perhaps even a member of the church that Sukkat Shalom took over as our building. But that there were real distinctions. Even where I live in East Wilmette, there were restrictive covenants on homes. And I think all of you know that. So how do we who live a very privileged life and who are kind of, if there's a caste system, we're at the top of the caste system. I think we have to be honest about that. How do we then confront inequality in America that is hardwired into our society? And we are privileged participants in that society, but we're trying to respond to the inequalities of our world. And we know that the caste system, just like as I said in Britain, of going to Eton or going to Cambridge or Oxford and all the other kinds of ways in which you are able to signal the caste you're in and be able to maintain that caste. We have New Trier and the Ivy Leagues and the professions. And in the last 30 or 40 years, Jews and Asians have moved into that caste and are largely accepted in that class, where there had once been very clear distinctions. Again, I'm speaking as a rabbi, as an analyst of the American Jewish experience. There is, in my way of thinking, no institutional anti-Semitism in America anymore. In the institutions that once were closed to Jews, whether they were law schools or medical schools or certain corporations and banks, and that's just not there anymore. So, and I'll get back to what Isabella Wilkerson says in terms of becoming white. And I think that's a very important distinction. That's a distinction she's making, that there is just inherently in being white a different caste than in being an African American. One of the things that's happened, of course, in what we might call white society, among Jews, among Asians, is that in the last 30, 40 years, there have been a lot of intermarriages, that there would be members of Kenilworth Union who have children who are married to children of Sukkat Shalom. And that has changed things dramatically, because when you have your Aunt Sarah, who's really lovely, it's not as easy to be, it's not easy to be prejudiced against somebody that sits at your dining room table at Thanksgiving and that you happen to like and even love. So that has changed for those of us who have benefited from a caste system that is in our favor. But we have to understand how deeply ingrained the caste system is to limit others. She talks about 8 pillars of caste. And so let me go through them. That the belief in the divine will, that these are divinely ordained or natural law. Traditionally, there was the curse of Ham. So divine will, the sense of inevitability, that this is what happens at birth. This was the one drop of blood issue. Endogamy, anti-marriage is part of the caste system. The idea of purity or pollution, that I think many of you may have seen the movie with Mr. Rogers, where he sits in the baby swimming pool with the African-American mailman, because this was a huge issue at that time. The occupational hierarchy, the jobs that are allowed for certain people of certain castes and not for others. Dehumanization and stigma, she talks about. Talks about terror and cruelty as a means of enforcement, as we know, the lynchings in the South, and the inherent superiority and inferiority of one caste over another. Again, I'm trying not to be too partisan, but what we have seen in voting patterns is a backlash against a movement in caste, so that whether you're a Democrat or Republican, I think you can understand that Barack Obama becoming president was a breaking out of caste. We can even talk about some of the subtleties of President Obama and even of Kamala Harris, the subtleties of that caste, because it's not an absolute, but still the response was that it was an assault on a caste privilege of people who felt that they were superior by caste simply because of the color of their skin, and that their caste was higher than anyone whose skin color was different. One of the great traumas that happened in the last number of years for the Jewish community was the Charlottesville riot. And at Charlottesville, the phrase being used by the neo-Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan and Proud Boys was, "You Jews will not replace us." And the concept that Jews were replacing whites was a caste issue, but there's a subtlety to that too, because it also was what happened in terms of the Tree of Life massacre at the synagogue in Pittsburgh and Squirrel Hill. The massacre happened not because exclusively that the terrorists hated Jews, but rather that Jews were seen as being the manipulators, the kind of the marionette pulling the strings of Blacks and immigrants coming to America, and that he was responding in Pittsburgh particularly, he was responding specifically to the idea that there was a caravan of Latin American and Mexicans coming to invade America, but that the Jews were the ones who were responsible for it, and they were replacing the white caste. There is something that came out of France called the Grand Replacement Theory by René Camus, not Albert Camus, but René Camus, which was that the white caste was being threatened, and even using the term of a white genocide by, in Europe, largely Muslims, and in America, largely Blacks and Hispanics. One of the interesting things, though, that Isabel Wilkerson talks about is that there really wasn't a concept of white in Europe in the same way, but that when European immigrants came to America, they became white. The new immigrants, whether they were from Eastern Europe, they were Slavs or Southern Europe or Irish or Jews, when they came to America, they immediately became in a caste above. I'm going to read you, just if you don't mind my reading, 2 paragraphs. Somewhere in the journey, Europeans became something they had never been or needed to be before. They went from being Czech or Hungarian or Polish to white, a political designation that only has meaning when set against something not white. They would join a new creation, an umbrella category for anyone who entered the new world from Europe. Germans gained acceptance as part of the dominant caste in the 1840s. According to immigration and legal scholar Ian Haney Lopez, the Irish in the 1850s to 1880s, and the Eastern and Southern Europeans in the early 20th century. And here's the line that I thought was most important. It was in becoming American that they became white. In Ireland or in Italy, whatever social or racial identities these people might have possessed, being white was not one of them. Serbs and Albanians, Swedes and Russians, Turks and Bulgarians, who might have been at war with one another back in their mother countries, were fused together on the basis not of a shared ethnic culture or language or faith or national origin, but solely on the basis of what they look like in order to strengthen the dominant caste in the hierarchy. I think that was, for me, that was extraordinarily insightful. Back again to my movie aficionado part, it's Gangs of New York. The Gangs of New York were the Germans and the Irish who were killing each other, except when it came to the draft riots of the Civil War, they were lynching Blacks. They had a common enemy. There was a common caste below them. James Baldwin, Wilkerson quotes saying, "No one was white before he or she came to America." And that African Americans were the unifying foil in solidifying the caste system. And so I think understanding that that caste system is unique to America, based on slavery first, but that and that it defined everyone above that lowest class. She turns to Nazi Germany, and that may be one of the reasons why you wanted a rabbi to talk about the book. She talks about in Nazi Germany the role that the model of Jim Crow laws in America served for the Nazis, and the American pseudoscience of eugenics, of saying that there were inherent differences in ethnic backgrounds and so forth, particularly in racial backgrounds, in terms of how smart your brain, your talents, all those things, was picked up by the Nuremberg laws of Germany that, according to her, were modeled on what was seen in America. And those same caste issues of pollution, of being subhuman, what the Germans called the Untermensch, the dehumanization, and that the Jews in Germany were seen as a threat to the racial purity of Aryans, was borrowed by the way in which American caste system viewed Blacks as a threat to racial purity. And then the Jews were blamed for the defeat in World War I. Jews had been blamed through conspiracy theory in France with the Dreyfus affair before that. But here's where I think the caste system with Germany and Jews breaks down to some extent, because in Germany, as in America with anti-Semitism here as well as in Europe was more a punching up than a punching down in the caste system. A punching up in that the Jews were seen as having too much prestige or wealth and living above their station. And the groups below their station were resentful. Now, I think that also explains the response to Barack Obama and to Kamala Harris in the same way, that if your identity is based on I am better than you simply because of the color of my skin, and then when someone of a different color of skin rises above you, there's great resentment to that. But the Nazis were surprised the Jews in America were not considered a separate race. For the Nazis, the Aryans, Jews were seen as a separate race. And they used the Jim Crow laws, particularly anti-miscegenation of marriage, of intermarriage, and outlawed it, although the American system, if you remember Showboat, of one drop of blood would make you Black. In the Nazi system, one great-grandparent would make you Jewish. So it wasn't quite as extreme, according to the Nazis. They were actually kind of surprised by how extreme anti-American racism was. But I think, back to the beginning, her framing of the issue is not as a black-white issue, but as a caste issue, and that the caste system is deeply ingrained in America. And we do see much of that, some of that caste system breaking down. But I worry that it is only in a certain sector of our society, largely the privileged sector in which we live. We seem to be more willing to break down the caste system than are those whose legitimacy is seen only in contrast to what they see as a lower caste below them, and that lower caste is defined by skin color. 99% of our genetic makeup is all the same, and a minor change in melatonin is what separates us by race. But the caste system was built in from the very beginning of America, and we are often not as aware of it as we need to be. And in order to make this country a more equitable, just nation, understanding that issue of caste, and as I said, the subtitle was The Origins of Our Discontents. So if we are discontented with injustice in America, it's important for us to understand those origins. I'll leave it at that for right now and open up for questions, responses. The nice thing about being on Zoom is you can't throw anything at me if we were in person.
And Sam, let me also just let people know that at this point, we always turn off the recording. People should feel free to ask whatever questions they want to ask, and we